The world's largest oil producer, Saudi Arabia, is reportedly asking to join BRICS. The regional bloc, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, has been touted as a serious counterweight to the Western-led world order. Just a week ago, during his visit to Saudi Arabia, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman expressed the kingdom's interest in joining BRICS. Saudi Arabia, home to 17% of the world's proven oil reserves, maintained close security and economic ties with the U.S. for decades. But since the election of Joe Biden, Riyadh has seen its relations with Washington worsen sharply. Earlier this month, OPEC Plus announced it would cut oil production by 2 million barrels a day. The U.S. blasted Saudi Arabia for the move, saying it would directly support Russia and hurt U.S. consumers ahead of next month's midterm elections. The BRICS countries have long called for new financial centers to counteract U.S.-dominated institutions like the IMF and World Bank. Would Saudi Arabia's inclusion into the group help BRICS achieve that goal? And for more on Saudi Arabia's potential inclusion into BRICS, I'm joined by Simon Mabon. He is a professor of international politics at the Lancaster University, and James Dorsey is a senior fellow at Singapore's Middle East Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, James, did the South African president's announcement that Saudi Arabia is interested in joining BRICS come to you as a surprise?
No, hardly. Saudi Arabia has been trying to diversify, or in any case, strengthen its relationships across the globe with various countries. Clearly with Saudi Arabia, or clearly with China, Russia, India. It just signed agreements with Saudi Arabia, with South Africa, whose president was recently in the kingdom. That makes perfect sense. In addition to which, of course, while BRICS is not an organization that really has made its mark yet, it does have the potential to do so, and Saudi Arabia would presumably add considerably to that.
So, Simon, how would BRICS expansion help bolster the group's influence on global markets?
I think it's about giving the kingdom options. In the past, the kingdom's been heavily reliant on the United States, on Washington and its relationship there. But in recent years, particularly the past decade or so, we've seen that there are points of tension beginning to emerge. We know that President Biden has been putting pressure on the kingdom. Previously called the kingdom a pariah. He wanted to make the kingdom a pariah state. And now with this this development over oil and Russia, the war in Ukraine, we're starting to see real schisms emerging. And I think what the kingdom's wanting to do is give itself options away from a reliance on Washington. And of course, China and Russia are two really powerful options in the international arena.
So, Simon, are relations between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. set to strain further? And do you believe Saudi Arabia is taking an anti-American stance, or is it just acting according to its interests?
I think it's acting according to its interests, but at this present moment, those interests are to some extent anti-American, in the sense that after the OPEC decision, which went against what Washington wanted, there were a lot of very, very powerful noises coming out of Washington, which were to punish Saudi Arabia essentially for the decision. And so what that's done is it's prompted many in the kingdom to try and think, well, the US is no longer someone that we can count on as an ally, and we need other options.
So, James, what would Saudi Arabia's membership to BRICS mean for other Middle Eastern countries? How would that impact the U.S. influence in the region? And do you believe if it is made a member, would other countries follow suit?
Well, I think two things. First of all, I don't know that membership in BRICS would necessarily change U.S. influence in the Middle East. I think Simon is right in the sense that the kingdom, given the strains and uncertainty on the part of the kingdom in terms of what the U.S. commitment going forward to security in the region is. But I also think that we've got to be very clear, what does it mean for for Saudi Arabia to diversify its relations and reduce its dependence on the United States? And that's where you start to see the limits of what the kingdom can and can do, at least in the short term. The ultimate, the ultimate way for the Saudi Arabia to loosen its dependence on the United States is to enhance its military capabilities. And what I mean with that is not what weapons it buys, but the fact of the matter is that it can buy the weapons, it can't win a war. It does not have the skills, it does not have the logistics, it doesn't have the whole infrastructure for that. And if you look at the U.S. Saudi relationship, one element of that close military cooperation is to try and enhance Saudi capabilities. Saudis can, in the middle term, reduce their dependence on the United States, but it's going to be a process, and it's not something that the Saudis simply can say, well, we're going to let China or Russia take over. That's not the way it's going to work.
So, Simon, a few months ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced that BRICS members plan to issue a new global reserve currency. How do you think that is going to play out, and what would that mean for the global economy?
Well, first things first, I'm not an economist, so I should just caveat my answer with that. But I think it's emblematic of the broader efforts to move away from a unipolar global system. And I think this is the other thing that's worth considering with regard to Saudi's aspirations to join the BRICS here. Because the BRICS are this collective, this loose collective of strong emerging economies. What they've started to do, though, in recent years is create infrastructure that can position themselves as against the Washington consensus, if you will. So different types of financial institutions to the IMF. We see the New Development Bank, for example, and the contingent reserve arrangement, things like that, that will position the BRICS and BRIC economies against and as an alternative to the Washington consensus. And so this move, this announcement from Putin, it's not surprising. It's emblematic of a broader geopolitical shift and broader geopolitical rivalries that are playing out in Ukraine, but have been playing out in lots of different arenas, some subtle, some more apparent over the past decade.
So, James, what do you think? Is Russia open to letting Saudi Arabia join BRICS?
I don't think there'll be any doubt about that. I think the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the South Africans, and there's certainly will be welcoming, and there's no reason why the Brazilians would not.
But could Saudi Arabia's membership dilute its influence and expose its economic weaknesses?
Well, I think what it's going to do is obviously Saudi Arabia brings financial heft to the table. It brings its natural resources, oil, of course. So I don't see how this is going to weaken Saudi Arabia. I think it's going to be one more lever in their diversification of their international relations. And it will probably strengthen BRICS, actually, rather than weaken it.
So, Simon, although Saudi Arabia has hinted its intention to join the bloc before, Turkey, Egypt, Argentina, and Iran are also among other countries who have expressed interest in joining. What's at stake for those countries, you think?
Well, I think for some of them, those that are closely allied to the Saudis, there's the possibility that this will strengthen their arguments, unless the BRICS are keen to ensure that there are only a limited number of states from a particular region joining at one time. I think the big thing is for the Iranians. I'm not convinced that the Saudis would be happy joining at the same time as Iran. Without some serious diplomatic breakthroughs in the Track 2 and Track 1.5 talks that have been going on. So I think there's a lot of different moving parts that are feeding into this. Some at the global level with the rivalry between the Russians and the Americans, and then some at a much more regional, much more local level with regard to the conflict that's playing out across the Middle East, which is then shaping how these states are interacting with one another and trying to position themselves with regard to the US-Russia dynamic and also this emergent BRIC bloc.
So, James, what are the prospects for Iran's membership as the country holds the world's second largest gas reserves?
I mean, again, Iran was recently admitted to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yes.
And in fact, it was admitted to the SCO even before Saudi Arabia had any status with the organization. It now has the status of a dialogue partner. So you may not see. I think clearly the Saudis are the ones who are first in line with BRICS, and in that sense, if you're going to get expansion of membership, it's going to be the Saudis first and the Iranians second. Now, the issue with that, of course, is that informally, for example, within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it's unanimous decision for membership. So Iran theoretically could, once it's a full member, it's still in the process of becoming so, could block Saudi Arabia. The other way around, that could happen in BRICS with if the Saudis were to come in first, and the Iranians would be knocking on the door afterwards.
So, James, are other members like India as enthusiastic as Russia and China to accept Saudi Arabia? What's the Indian position here?
The Indians have forged very close relationships with the Saudis. The Saudis they're a major trading partner. There are major investment projects going on. Increasingly, India sees the Gulf as part of its security. So I don't see that the Indians would have any real problem with the Saudis joining.
So, Simon, does this organization bear in mind the rivalries among member states and prospective members?
Well, if you think about it, there are already very serious schisms in the BRIC communities. If you think India and China are longtime rivals, they do not have particularly positive relations. They're engaged in various border disputes. There are deep social, political, religious, economic rivalries between the two, and yet they're able to operate in the same organization. Similarly, Russia and China have had their differences over the years, and they're able to operate. So I think once the membership situation has been resolved, there is a precedent for people putting aside their differences and being able to operate together in the spirit of working towards this broader collective goal, which is to ensure that these economies are able to thrive. But I think the big issue for the rivalries is actually getting membership of the organization itself.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.